All right, so these delegates have just written up this new constitution that added a lot more power to this new national government. They've spent a lot of time figuring out the executive branch, a lot of time figuring out the legislative branch, a tiny bit of time figuring out the judicial branch, and they've come up with an all-new government that adds new power to this national government. Doesn't necessarily take a lot of power away from the states, but it does make the national government more powerful, and depending on how you interpret the Constitution, it could be making the national government more powerful than the state governments. And this is obviously going to be a problem for these delegates who now have to go back to the state legislatures and explain to them, I know you said just to amend the Articles of Confederation, but we went ahead and wrote this whole new thing. And again, now you might not be the big dog on the block because we're going to have this new national government with a lot more power. Again, depends on how you interpret the Constitution, but some are going to be looking at it as, man, this is creating a powerful government that's a long way away. So some of the state legislatures are going to say, you know what? The time period in the Articles of Confederation was a disaster. We had so many economic problems, so many problems in the West, rebellion, Shays' Rebellion, that type of thing. We need a stronger national government. We're going to go ahead and improve this Constitution right away. You'll have some states incredibly enthusiastic about it. I shouldn't say incredibly enthusiastic, but some states understanding that this is a necessity. Other states are going to see this new Constitution, and the state legislatures are going to be confused. They're going to look at this, and if you read the Constitution, some of it is confusing. It's the way it's worded. You know, what does this passage mean? You can be confused, you know, saying, does this mean you can add this power? Does it mean that you can have this power? Does this take this power away from the states? Just the wording can be interpreted in multiple different ways. And so some states are going to be hesitant to give their approval to this new Constitution just because they don't understand what the Constitution's saying. So for this reason, we're going to see 3 of the delegates that were present at the Constitutional Convention are going to write up a series of articles basically trying to explain specific passages in the Constitution. These are called the Federalist Papers. So the people that are going to write these up are going to be James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton. They're going to write these up anonymously. But you can think about this as almost a expanded Constitution. So what they're going to do is they're going to take specific passages of the Constitution and they're going to say, this is exactly what we mean by it. So it's not an official document, but if you're a judge or if you're a lawyer and you deal a lot with constitutional law, you are going to have this by your side because it's basically saying exactly what the Founding Fathers mean by each specific part of the original Constitution. So they lay this out in detail. Now, pretty boring and things like that, but I guess if you're trying to explain stuff precisely, it should be boring. But a lot of the state legislatures that are confused by the wording of the document will start reading these Federalist Papers, these essays, and they're going to start saying, okay, this is what this means. I guess I understand it now. And you'll see more state legislatures get on board because of these Federalist Papers. So this is going to convince some people, all right, I'm giving my thumbs up to this new Constitution. And you're going to see other state legislatures, even with this, they're still hesitant. Some people are going to say, I don't like the idea of a larger national government. I think it's too much. I don't trust it. I'm afraid this is going to mean a king is coming down the road and it's going to get so much power that it's going to take power away from the states and it's going to take power away from the people. Yeah, and a lot of people hopped up in the Enlightenment, think people are deserving of certain rights, and they're afraid that this new Constitution will deny people of their rights. And there's going to be a huge debate in a lot of states. This would be one in Virginia, the House of Burgesses, basically saying we shouldn't approve of it because it doesn't say that the government can't take away certain things from us. You know, some people are going to be saying, what if, the government comes in and forces us to be, accept a certain religion? You'll have a lot of Catholics in Maryland. The majority of people in the United States are Protestant. What if they determine to make this a Protestant nation and force us to convert or kick us out? Some people, what if they come in and do what King George did, start forcing soldiers us to house soldiers in our homes? What if they start seizing property, that type of thing? Well, people are going to counter to these people who are arguing this and say, well, no, the national government can't do that because the power is not laid out in the Constitution. It can't force soldiers to house in your homes because the Constitution doesn't say it can do that. Well, other people are going to argue and say, well, but it does provide, for the general welfare, the general security. What if that means housing soldiers in the homes? Can't they just pass a law allowing the government to do that? I want assurances that this is not going to happen. So some state legislatures are so worried about the king, the government taking on new powers, they want a guarantee of certain rights, okay? So the government will not do certain things, okay? So you're going to see that as this is happening, this debate's going to go 1787, 1788, into 1789, you're going to have some states say, I'm not going to do it unless we amend the Constitution and we have the Constitution say the government will not do certain things. So to appease these people, they are going to promise certain states that if they agree to join this new constitutional government, approve it, then they're immediately going to amend it. So first thing Congress is going to meet, this new Constitutional Congress is going to meet, they're going to propose some new amendments, they'll approve them, then they'll send them out to the states for approval, and they're going to go into the Constitution. So the second we get there, we're going to amend it and add these promises, these protections. So the promise of a Bill of Rights will convince other states to get on board with this new Constitution. By 1789, you have 11 of 13 states have agreed to the new Constitution. Rhode Island, they didn't even show up at the meeting of the Constitutional Convention. They get this Constitution. They're basically, we're not going to pay attention to it. New York, there's also some people there still hesitant to accept it, but you have 11 of the 13 states who are on board with it. Basically, these 13 states are going to look and say, we're not convincing North Carolina and Rhode Island anytime soon. So let's just go ahead and get started without them, and then we'll sort of cross our fingers and hope they get on board with it, after we get started. So by 1789, what they're going to determine is just go ahead and every state, what you need to do is you need to hold elections for House of Representative members. And actually, they're going to conduct a really quick census of the states to apportion House of Representative members, and then they'll say South Carolina, hold your election. Georgia, hold your election. Maryland, hold your election for House of Representative members. They're going to say to each of the state legislatures, pick 2 senators. So get your guys ready. We're going to go ahead and have this first meeting of this federal Congress, or the first meeting of this Constitutional Congress. And so pick your 2 senators and pick your 2, or pick however many electors you have to choose our first president. So they're going to pick as the first capital, and this is actually where the Articles of Confederation capital had been in New York. This will be the first capital. So in 1789, you're going to have this, very beginning of 1789, these electors will show up, and again, this is going to be however many House of Representative members you have plus your senators. Each state's going to send them to meet in New York, and they're going to show up before Congress shows up to basically pick the first president. So these electors, they show up, they each get 2 votes. They're going to hold this vote. When they hold the vote, the person that's going to get the second number of votes, so this is Federal Hall, this is where the electors are going to meet and where Congress is later going to meet. When they hold their vote, the person that's going to get the second number of electoral votes is a guy named John Adams. He's from Massachusetts. We'll talk a lot more about him later, but he ends up coming in second. They're going to decide, what do we call him? Vice president. Basically, the office of vice president, we didn't talk about it much in the last lecture, but all it's there for is something happens to the president, and it's also going to break ties in the Senate. But he gets picked as vice president. He's not going to get he's going to get a majority of votes from of one of the 2 votes from all the electors, but there are a couple other people that receive votes as well. 1 vote from every single elector is going to go towards George Washington, so he's easily going to win the presidency. So every one of the electors is going to submit one of their votes towards George Washington. The reason they pick George Washington is again because same reason they picked him to head the Constitutional Convention. People trust him. They know he's not going to be a dictator, and he really is not. This is one of the qualities about George Washington. He's humble, and again, the way they do this electoral college system, the way they initially set it up, Washington's not running for this thing. Adams isn't running for this thing either. They're just chilling out when they receive word, hey, these electoral members just met in New York. John Adams, you're vice president. George Washington, you're president. Washington's going to get this message and he's going to be like, crap, I got stuff I got to do here. But he's going to end up accepting this not because he wants the power, but because he thinks it's his duty. If I'm going to make this independent government work, I think they need me, and I think I'd be a good person to lead. So he's picked not necessarily for his intelligence, again, a smart guy, but because he's a moderate, he's not going to seek power. He's a good person to deal with people, and again, because he is humble. So Washington's going to pack up his stuff from Virginia, and he's going to head up to New York. So I'm saying he's a humble person, but when Washington heads to New York, he is going to put on the biggest show you can imagine. As a matter of fact, he is going to show up basically in a boat, recreate the scene from crossing the Trenton, crossing the Delaware and attacking Trenton, New Jersey during the American Revolution. He's going to have fireworks. These are going to be bursting in air, and he's just going to show up like Apollo Creed. If anybody's ever seen Rocky IV, at the very beginning, Apollo Creed's about to fight Ivan Drago, and he's got this big American hat on. He's like, I am a real American. He puts on this showy flash and in order to fight Ivan Drago. Didn't turn out very well for him, by the way, but don't want to spoil things. But anyway, Washington's basically going to do that same thing. Showy. He's going to get off this boat. He's going to get onto this carriage. He's going to make people kneel down and kiss his ring. And he's going to put on this huge pomp and circumstances when arriving to take over as first president of the United States. Now, as a humble guy, why would he do this? Well, Washington's going to do this because the way he sees the president's office, he's going to be having to deal with the King of England, the King of France. He's going to be having to deal with the King of Spain, that type of thing. He wants those powers to view this as an equal position to his. So they act like this, that, so he's got to act like that as well. He wants the foreign powers to respect the position. He wants the people to respect the position as much as they would a king. So he's going to make it look like this is how it should be done. So Washington will accept the job, and he's going to show up there. He'll arrive in April 1789. He's going to arrive up there at the same time we're going to see all the senators and House of Representative members are going to show up as well. So we're going to have our first meeting of Congress in 1789. Here's Washington taking an oath of office to become president. This is a different showing. This is him on top of Federal Hall doing it. So you're going to have all these senators in all, the states are going to choose each of their 2 senators. They're going to choose however many House of Representative members are going to show up. So Georgia will only get the 1, Virginia, whatever, the 10. And they're going to show up at Federal Hall in New York, and they're going to meet for their first session of Congress. So this first Continental Congress, first Federal Congress. Here's the thing about this meeting. I don't know why nobody pays attention to this first Congress. You can go out and you can find tons of painting on the Constitutional Convention. You can find tons of paintings on Washington's inauguration. You cannot find anything on the first meeting of Congress, but this is by far the biggest, most important meeting of Congress in American history. And basically, you can think about these senators, these House of Representative members. They're going to be passing laws and doing things to fill out the Constitution. So at the Constitutional Convention in 1787, they're basically, coming up with this Constitution's new form of government, but they didn't come up with everything, and you need the laws to help you enforce the Constitution, and you need to sort of fill in the blanks for the Constitution. You need to actually make the Constitution run, and so in order to do that, you need laws to support it. So this first Congress, you can think of it as filling in the blank spaces in the Constitution and putting in the laws that are going to help this new government enforce the Constitution. So you have these elected House of Representative members, and again, I should point out the House of Representative members, they're chosen in elections, but the elections are set by the states. Most states are going to say only people of certain wealth are going to vote. A lot of states are going to say only people of certain race can vote, and all states are only going to say men can vote, but that is somewhat democratically elected. And then you have the upper house of Senate. This is just going to be chosen by the state legislatures. But these guys are going to be here. They got this new Constitution. We need to put this thing into effect. We need to make it work. So when they meet, one of the things they're going to have to decide is, hey, in order for this thing to work, we need money. We need to pay money. And we have all this debt from the Articles of Confederation, from the American Revolution. We've got to pay this off. We can't just forget about it because we switched governments. So how are we going to do this? Well, at this first meeting of Congress, you can now tax. The Constitution gives this power to tax. You have this new government in place, but they're going to decide no taxes. We're not going to immediately tax. The reason they're going to do this is because they don't want the people to be nervous about this new constitutional government. If we came out the gate immediately taxing, people are going to say, hey, that's part of the reason we fought Britain. We don't want that to happen with this new constitutional government, so we don't trust it. Now, they are going to put a duty on incoming outgoing goods of 5% duty. They're going to make money off of that. So that's going to be one thing that they'll do to make money, but not tax. Now, another thing this first Congress is going to do is it's going to set up a policy for dealing with the West. So under the Articles of Confederation, they had tons of problems in the West. Specifically, they didn't know what to do with land in the West. They didn't know what to do with federal land that the federal government owned in the West. And in particular, they didn't know what to do with this Northwest Territory. So this Northwest Territory had been deeded. These states had given up claims to this Northwest Territory. It was given to the federal government. But under the Articles of Confederation, they didn't know what to do with it. They want to sell it because, that's one of the powers the federal government has, but they didn't know what to do with it. Well, under the Articles of Confederation, one of the few things they're going to come up with is this Northwest Land Ordinance of 1785 and this Northwest Land Ordinance of 1787. Don't worry about those. Basically, what's going to happen in 1789 at the first meeting of Congress is they're going to take these previous Northwest ordinances and they're going to codify this into law into the new Constitution with something called the Northwest Ordinance of 1789. This is basically taking one of the few laws that was passed in the Articles of Confederation government. This is expanding upon it, and this is going to make it clear what happens with new states that are coming into the Union. So one of the things what to do with land in the West is, in this particularly this Northwest ordinance, is basically going to say that in order for anybody to move on to areas in the Northwest Territory, the national government first has to make treaties with Indian tribes in the region. So let's say we want this chunk of land right here, but you have, let's go with Shawnee Indians, Ohio Indians, something like that are living in this area. In order for the federal government to do anything with that land, they first have to meet with prominent Indian tribes in the area, and they have to get the Indian group to agree to move off the land. So this might be done in war, but in a perfect world to be done, you go out there, you provide goods to the Indians, you offer them additional land in a different area perhaps, and you go in here, you buy this land. Now, a lot of Indian groups don't want to sell their land, and we're going to be talking a lot about that later, but some Indian groups, again, you have horrendous die-off from all these diseases, 80-90% of the population dying off. Maybe they don't need this land, they could use the goods. So let's say they decide to trade it. Well, you're going to need a treaty signed by an official from the United States. So the Indian group here does not want this land. They decide to trade it. They meet all the tribal leaders in the area will meet with an American official, and they're going to lay out what land sold to the United States. So the Northwest Ordinance basically guarantees that land has to be taken from the Indians or agreed to be given to the United States. This could be done in war, but also be done in trade. So now you own this chunk of land, United States government. It's signed over to the U.S. government. Well, what happens with it then? Well, the 1789 Northwest Ordinance is going to lay out exactly what's done with this land. What it'll do is it's going to portion this land up into different plots. So you're going to have U.S. government officials will basically cut out these plots, and what they're going to do is they're going to sell 640-acre plots to individuals, because they want people to move out west. Remember, you're having all these problems in this territory, and U.S. is worried the British are going to take it back. They still have forts in the region, and again, you need people out there to secure the land. So they're going to offer incredibly cheap prices for this acreage. I believe it's like something like $1 for 640 acres. No, $1 an acre, I believe, is what the price is. That's incredibly cheap. So if you move out there, you grab this land, and again, the federal government's going to be benefiting because they're getting people out west, and they're making a little bit of profit from the sale of the land. Well, what happens when you get a lot of people out there? So this is going to be area that there's no state government. Who's going to be governing the people that move to this region? Well, the Northwest Ordinance of 1789 will say that once 5,000 people move to an area, they can form a territorial legislature. So what this territorial legislature will do is it's going to make rules for the new region. So move out here, 5,000 people are living out here now. They vote for a territorial legislature, and that territorial legislature can start taxing if they want to, start creating militia policies, start doing whatever they need to meet the basic needs of the people. So 5,000 people form a territorial legislature. Here's the thing, though. This territorial legislature, you can make local laws, but you're not going to get to participate in the national government. You're not big enough yet. So we get 5,000 people, territorial legislature, national government selling off land. Maybe it's buying more land from local Indian groups. Let's say you get 60,000 people in a region. What happens at that point is that the people of the region can then write a state constitution. So vote for a legislature, they write a state constitution. They then submit this constitution to the United States Congress, and so 60,000 people write a state constitution. Congress will approve of the state constitution or disapprove it, but if they approve of it, what they'll say to the people in this new area, you are now a state in the Union, and you are equal to the old states. So what that means is you now get 2 senators as representatives in Congress, and you get to a portion. It's going to, for all states, it's going to initially be 1 House of Representative members because, just the way it is, 60,000 people. But then if you grow more, you'll get more House of Representative members, and you're going to have equal rights to the old states. They specifically point this out in the Northwest Ordinance of 1789. You're coming in on equal footing of the old states. Now, the reason they do this is because they don't want to be what Britain was to them. So Britain basically said to them, while these areas were colonies, you don't have a vote in Parliament. You're lesser than us. So they want to say that any states formed out of this Northwest Territory, we're not treating you as a colony, we're treating you as an equal. So they are going to say that any states formed out of this Northwest Territory come in at equal footing, get the same representation as other areas. So this is in this Northwest Ordinance. Final thing with the Northwest Ordinance, and this also sort of shows the situation in 1789, feelings towards slavery. They're going to make it clear that there's no slavery in the Northwest Territory. No slavery in the Northwest Territory. It is forbidden. Now, a couple different reasons for this, but the predominant thought is that slavery is morally wrong. Everybody's hopped up on the Enlightenment at the time, and basically one of the things we need to do to prevent stop slavery is prevent its expansion, so we don't want it out here in this Northwest Territory. So they're going to ban slavery out here. So, and by the way, when this is going to go up for a vote in this first federal Congress, even Southerners are going to vote for this, which is going to become an issue because later on Southerners are going to say slavery is a positive good. It's something we've always supported. A lot of Northerners are going to point back and say, wait a minute, but you guys voted for this, which said no slavery. now you're going back on what you said before. So this positive argument, good, doesn't really work. But again, at the time, 1789, they will vote on it. So very quickly, this Northwest Land Ordinance, it's based on some of the tiny bit of legislation that was passed into the Articles of Confederation. So if you look this up, you'll find some legislation there. But it basically combines all this different legislation. It says that you have to purchase land from Indians in the Northwest Territory before government can sell it off. Then government sells it off, so 640 acre plots. Then once you get 5,000 people, you can become a territory, make local laws. Once you get 60,000 people, you can write a state constitution, enter in as a state, and then no slavery in this area. Well, the reason that we're talking about this specifically refers to the Northwest Territory, and these rules will be set for to create 5 states out of this Northwest Territory. But the thing is, these rules are going to be applied pretty much to everywhere the U.S. acquires in the West. So later on, U.S. spoilers are going to get territory from Spain, Mexico, and the U.S. will apply these same rules. 5,000 people get a territory, and then you can create a territorial legislature. 60,000 become a state. Starts here, but they're just going to take the same rules and apply it to other areas as well. So Northwest Ordinance sets the rules for how a state becomes a territory. So this is done by this first meeting of Congress. All right, so what else is this first meeting of Congress going to do? Well, the other thing they're going to do is, or at least one more thing they're going to do, is they're going to clarify what that Judiciary Act means. So, or what the judicial branch of the Constitution does. So the Constitution, again, very short on the judicial branch, almost nothing. So they're going to pass something called the Judiciary Act of 1789. This is something that is going to try to clarify exactly how this federal judicial system works. In the Constitution, it really says there's a Supreme Court and there's going to be federal courts. What the Judiciary Act basically lays out is how these federal courts are divided up. So if you ever get in trouble, break a law, you're probably going to go to either city court, state court, or federal court. And a lot of times these are in the same buildings, but they're going to be different judges. But you can have federal court's going to try federal crimes. You're going to have a state court will try state crimes. City court will try city crimes. So you could go to court for a variety of different things. What the Judiciary Act basically sets up is how the federal court system is going to work. So it says we'll have federal courts in these states this way, and it's going to say that if you're charged with a federal crime, you go to federal court, and if you don't like the judgment, you can appeal it up to this appellate court, okay? And then you can also then appeal it up to the Supreme Court. So the Judiciary Act sets the rules for how to appeal to the Supreme Court. It also is going to set the number of Supreme Court justices. Initially, it's going to set it at one Supreme Court justice. Head Justice, the guy that's going to be John Jay, will be appointed by George Washington. It's initially going to set it at 6 justices, and this is a law, by the way. This is not an amendment to the Constitution. We'll see other laws will subsequently change it from 6. At one point, it's going to go down to 5. It'll then go up to 9. It'll go down to 7. Eventually, it's going to be set at 9. But according to the Judiciary Act in 1789, the number of Supreme Court justices will be initially set at 6. So it's set at 6. That, again, can be changed by law. If, hypothetically, you could have Congress today decide they don't like what the Supreme Court's doing and change the law and say there's 100 Supreme Court justices, and then the president gets to appoint 99 or 91 more justices, and the Supreme Court's not going to strike down anything that they don't want because, again, he'll get to appoint most of those justices. But Judiciary Act sets the number of justices at 6, sets up this federal court system, and the really interesting thing about the Judiciary Act of 1789 is that they say that issues in state court can be appealed up to the Supreme Court. This might not seem like anything, but this and another piece of wording in the Judiciary Act is basically going to make the case that you can appeal state laws as well as federal laws up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court can interpret and determine whether or not these break the agreement with the Constitution of the United States. So A lot of people think that people are voting on this and don't really understand what they're voting on. But the Judiciary Act is going to set by law, not Constitution. Again, this could change by law. I'm surprised somebody hasn't done it yet. But this is basically going to make it to where the Supreme Court is an interpreter of constitutionality. This is the Supreme Court's main job these days. That's not in the Constitution. It's only set by law in this Judiciary Act, and it's just been kept up in practice. Although I should say the Supreme Court will not practice this for a very long time. It's going to be over a decade before they determine the constitutionality of an act. But this will be put in place in the Judiciary Act. So what this means is now we have the President as a determiner of constitutionality with his veto, and we now have the Supreme Court as a determiner of constitutionality. As we're going to talk about, other people will determine constitutionality. So Judiciary Act, I found this neat little storyboard I thought was pretty interesting. How many courts are going to be? 6 Supreme Court justices, 1 Chief Justice, sets up the federal district courts, 1 in each state, appellate courts, and then just basically says how the judicial system will work. So that's another thing we're going to see out of this first Congress, how the judicial system works. A lot of it is done by law. Final thing they're going to do at this first meeting of the U.S. Congress, or the Constitutional Congress, will be to approve those Bill of Rights. Remember, there are some states that said, I don't trust this new government. I want guarantees of certain protections. So what we'll see at this first meeting is that they are going to write up a number of articles. There's actually going to be 12 initially approved by Congress. States will only approve 10 of them. But they're going to approve these amendments to the Constitution. So the first meeting of the constitutional government, they change the Constitution. All right. So what this Bill of Rights is going to basically say, 2/3 of Congress will approve of this, and then it's going to go out to the states. The states will approve the first 10 of these. It's going to be guarantees that the government can't do anything. Again, one of the articles, or one of the things that people are worried about, is that the government will take away certain rights. People are saying it can't take away rights because the Constitution doesn't give them rights, but these people insisted that we want to promise that they are not going to take them away. So what you get with these the Bill of Rights, these first 10 amendments, is basically promises like government's not going to establish a national religion. It's not going to prohibit speech. It's not going to take away the right to peacefully assemble. You can address your grievances. It's going to say things like that people don't care about, like government can't soldier people or shelter soldiers in your house. It's going to say things like states want to maintain militias, and they want to arm these militias so the national government can't take away arms, so it prevented states from holding their militias. You're going to have the government can't take away a right to life, liberty, and property. Essentially, it'll say that without due process of law. Everybody knows the Fifth Amendment. So this is basically going to lay out all these protections, things that the national government can't do. Now, I should point out, doesn't say anything about state governments. State governments hypothetically can still take away these rights. Later on, we're going to get to the point where they say they can't. But you'll have, like, certain states, like Massachusetts, it will still have laws saying, Catholics can't serve in their state legislature. It's not going to come along until later that we'll see that this will be applied to the state governments. But this basically just says national government cannot do these things. So it guarantees certain rights to the people. And as we see, the states are going to approve 10 of the 12 of these. A lot of interesting story, actually, with what happens with the remaining 2 amendments. But yeah, again, the first protections will be approved by this first meeting of Congress. So again, think about this first Congress as sort of filling in the gaps for this Constitution. All right, so now this Constitution has been written, and again, this first meeting of Congress has been held. So a couple final thoughts about this Constitution. It does absolutely create a stronger national government, although how strong that is when compared to states is going to be a matter of debate for a long time. But some people argue that this basically created a government that is much more in the best interest of the wealthy, is less representative than the Articles of Confederation had been. So if you look at the Constitution, it forms a democratic republic. But the way the Constitution is written, the democracy section is very small. Now today we have a lot of democracy, so today we have a democratic republic. But if you look at the way the Constitution is originally written, it's a democratic republic, but it's more of a democratic republic. Okay, the democracy part is really small. So if you look at it, the House of Representatives is the only body that's directly elected by the people, but that can be restricted by states. So the House of Representatives, it says in the Constitution, states hold elections for the House of Representatives. But as we're going to see, almost all states are going to take away, only allow people with property to vote. All states say no women can vote, and a good chunk of states are going to say only people of certain races can vote. So one of the branches of legislature, so half a legislature is chosen by the people, but probably only about a quarter or even less than that of the people actually can vote for that. Every other branch of this national government is there's a layer between the people. So the Senate is chosen by the state legislature. So there's state legislatures between the people and the Senate. The president is chosen by electors who are chosen by state legislatures. So in order to get to the president, you got the people, they vote in the state legislature vote electors, vote for the president. There's 3 layers there. And then the president picks the Supreme Court justices, so there's even more layers between the people and the president there. That's not very democratic. I mean, it's partially democratic because it's representatives picking other representatives, but it's not like the democracy we have today. As we're going to be talking about, things are going to become much more democratic later on. But this is pulling back in a lot of ways the what had been happening under the Articles of Confederation. So for all these reasons, the Articles of Confederation aren't working. But the one thing that is true is that it is more democratic than the Constitution's coming after. Because under the Articles of Confederation, most powerful government to the average American was the state government. In most state governments, to varying degrees, the people chose the state legislature. So the most powerful government body is the local body, directly chosen by the people, made up of a lot of people that live in the community. As we're going to be talking about, this national government's taken on a lot of power, and there are now a lot of steps between the people in the national government. As a matter of fact, this got a guy named Charles Beard. He basically argued that the Constitution is a bunch of wealthy people trying to protect their property from the lower classes, and meant to take power away from people that were given to them under the Articles of Confederation. And you can certainly make that argument. There are people that are worried during the Articles of Confederation about guys like Daniel Shays Rebellion. You actually have people at the Constitutional Convention that were worried about this. They thought they were creating like an oppressive aristocracy. So I don't think that's incorrect to interpret the Constitution that way, but you could also interpret it as the Articles of Confederation didn't work. I mean, they weren't going to be paying off the debt. They weren't going to be solving the problems of the individual states. The individual states wouldn't have been able to accomplish the same things individually as they are going to together. So you could also argue that, yes, it is a departure from the democracy of the Articles of Confederation, but some people could also argue that it's necessary. So I'm not sure which interpretation is correct, but there is legitimacy to both interpretations. All right, we'll talk about this first, how this new president and how this new Congress, after this first meeting, is going to deal with the various problems that come about when you start seeing political parties form and when foreign countries start interfering in your affairs.